Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I'm back in Contact Report 625. We're also going to take a look at Contact Report 543, and I'll play some clips this evening, and then we'll get into our normal discussions. First of all, Billy talks about how the U.S. is intentionally not putting its most intense effort in against ISIS. Let me read a little something here. The weapons industry, which delivers all the munitions for the fruitless actions against the IS, is kept alive, whereby naturally also countries themselves profit to a great extent. So this is because they collect immense taxes from the manufacturers of the fighter aircraft, weapons, munitions, rockets, and bombs. And that's pretty much shown to be true. I mean, if you remember how effective Russia was against ISIS, which seemed to stir up a whole lot of trouble internationally. And then in the second page of this contact, Billy goes on to talk about how the Vietnam War got started under false pretenses with a false sonar echo that was picked up by the USS Maddox, which then fired its guns for 2 hours at non-existent enemies, wildly shooting across the ocean. And then fighter aircraft from the USS Ticonderoga took off and bombed Hanoi. So we've been doing this kind of thing for a while. In the next couple of pages, Billy talks about how we're kind of going a little crazy here in the U.S. The police are shooting people rampantly, and we've almost legalized murder. He talks about how we're very unsafe with our guns here, and that's resulted in a lot of people being killed unintentionally. It says here, January to May of the year 2015, 385 human beings were shot by police, whereby legalized murder is more likely the right label. And in the USA now we have 800,000 police, whereby a certain number of them effectively are to be labeled as killers in uniform. And they go unpunished after every murder freely according to that rule, which is a pretty shocking thing. I've never heard Billy quite talk about things like this. So in any case, I just wanted to give an overview of this contact report. Again, I thought it was very interesting. Billy recommends that we use an international force to fight against the terrorist groups, that we should surround them with larger numbers and then use non-lethal weapons against them. And this was done during the time of Nokodemian and Hanok. I'll read this here. It says, therefore also all Nazi and other groups set up on the racial extremism in the USA must be targeted and stamped out, and indeed through a multinational strike force for peace in accord with the schema of Nokodemian and Hanok. And they talk about the fact that we could use this multinational strike force and use by means of all kinds of anesthetizing weapons, gas, substances, beam and shock weapons. And that would be the one way we could fight terrorism. And let me jump ahead here. I thought it was really interesting what he had to say about Chancellor Merkel, who I believe, let's just read here. And Billy says, which also would mean that the interference of the USA in the EU dictatorship and its idiotic dictatorship politics would come to an end, and thereby also the agitating Russia, which is quite especially being driven in the EU by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel in cooperation with the US. The EU dictatorship-led politics fires up far-reaching conflict with Russia, ever farther, which could lead to very grave circumstances if the EU dictatorships, and above all Angela Merkel, does not finally change course. Instead of going towards bad confrontations with Russia. So evidently the EU is confronting Russia in some very negative ways. And I wanted to cover this because Billy talks about Angela Merkel and some very interesting, I want to play some clips here as well about her. That is the reason why she is sought out and preferred by the U.S. politicians. And she does not notice in her reality-estranged-naivety. And this is actually a kind of personality disorder that this Angela Merkel has. She's divorced from reality. She's so naive. And I'm going to play some clips here in a little bit where the German people are really rebelling against these immigrants. Anyway, she says that she is underhandedly and unhonestly used, seduced, and has her mind poisoned for the U.S. plans. Consequently, she acts according to the U.S. insinuations, which are established in her by indoctrinating the EU mighty ones in the cunning form desired by the USA. I do have a call in, and I have several numbers up here, so I may press the wrong number here, and excuse me if I do. 949, is that you, Nate?
I think so.
Okay, good. Yes, I just wanted to bring you on. I didn't want to hold you off the air any longer. And
how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
Pretty good. It's nice weather over here. How about you over there?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's been wonderful all day.
Is it kind of Merkel-y over there?
Huh?
Nothing. It was a Merkel joke.
It's a Merkel joke. I'm gonna roll on, and you tell me when you're ready to jump in, okay? I'm just gonna roll on here a little bit. But stupidity and idiocy just know no limits, as is the case with the federal chancellor, and indeed especially because she has a reality-estranged-naivety, and thereby also one of the innumerable forms of a personality disorder, which is also connected with the psychopathic forms and which leads to a might-delusion. And to say about that is that the reality-estranged-naivety has nothing to do with actual naivety. And then he goes on to explain this, what normal naivety is. But this is a little bit different. This is a person that definitely is delusional and has a personality disorder. I thought that was worth noting. Let me go ahead.
I did see something that might be interesting when Putin was actually talking to Merkel, saying, something to the effect of that the U.S. is using her, and it's like a wedding night. And what happens then? Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting analogy. Well, I'm going to
no matter what.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I was going to play a clip, but you had something else to say. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Okay. This is about the heavy immigration that's going on and what it's doing to Germany and what's kind of going on over there. So let me go ahead and play this clip, make a few adjustments here quickly.
Over Muslim refugees dominates much of the political rhetoric here at home. It pales in comparison to the dark backlash spreading across Europe. Tense protests, street brawls, even arson attacks. So what does this mean for the thousands of refugees now caught up in a personal purgatory? Here's my Nightline co-anchor, Dan Harris.
We want a Europe free from fear, free from terrorists who shout Allah Akbar.
There is something unsettling about standing in a square once named after Adolf Hitler and listening to thousands of Germans chant nationalist slogans.
What they're chanting now is traitors of the people. They're referring to the leaders of Germany who are allowing all these refugees in.
Germany has just registered its 1 millionth refugee, and these people want to send them home. This continent is at a boiling point. While the debate over Muslim refugees rages in America, we're traveling across Europe, where the far right is turning angry rhetoric.
The reality is that the next terrorist attack in Europe will be by Muslims.
Into reality.
We want Sweden to stay Swedish.
Fueled by a seemingly endless river of refugees, as well as by the ISIS attacks in Paris.
At least one attacker posing as a refugee.
Ultra-conservative, anti-immigrant parties are on the rise. Caught in the crosshairs, the migrants, many of them escaping war zones, only to now be confronted with a wave of assault and arson attacks. In Germany, the most provocative anti-refugee movement is called Pegida, and it's led by this man, Lutz Bachmann. Recently, this picture of him, apparently masquerading as Hitler, surfaced in the local media. He insists it was photoshopped.
We are for the Christian, Jewish culture, because this is the culture we have in Europe. We don't have an Islam culture here.
But so there's no room for another religion?
Islam is no religion. There's an ideology, a fascistic ideology.
A fascistic ideology.
Yeah.
This is a chant.
Very interesting what's going on abroad. I think it's coming in the U.S. Any comments, Nate?
What was that guy's name again?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
So here's what really I think really is very interesting about the whole situation. You know, the people that have a point in Germany, you know, it just I don't know. They have a point, you know, not to let this different ideology in, you know, and what could be hidden in the immigrants can be terrorists themselves. You know, they have a populace that they need to look to and take care of. But you have two conflicting ideologies that come up against it. But the people in Germany that have a point are now thrown under the guise of Nazism and extremism.
Right. Yes.
You know, just like when like students do protest, they get marginalized as students.
Mm-hmm. Very good point.
I think that's pretty sad because people think in terms of, you know, ways of you know, I don't have to pay attention because you already gave me the answer. They're just, you know, extremist Germans, or they're just students, you know, regardless if they have a point or not. So I think that's very interesting.
I think you make very sound points there. I want to switch gears quickly. I'm going to be jumping around a bit tonight, I believe. This is Contact Report 543, Nate, which you and I have talked about offline a little bit, at least message back and forth. And this is the one that talks about the dangers of our electronic media. So this is why I recommend everyone to try to cut down if you can. This is Billy talking to Ptah, and I don't exactly have the date in front of me when this occurred, but here's what Billy says. But when we're on the photo book, then I would have a further question concerning what you have said on the 7th of July in the 542nd official talk regarding electronic books. You wanted yet to give a further explanation after the end of the official talk, but unfortunately that was lost in our subsequent conversation. And Ptah says, yes, I remember. To the explanation, I wanted to add that the reading of electronic books for the consciousness activity in the physical brain is extremely harmful. extremely harmful. It goes on to explain this. Namely, if by the reading of electronic data only this is included, however not processed in good measure through the intellect, rationality, and logic, then slowly but surely there occurs a consciousness poverty and a consciousness deterioration. And what I think they're talking about there is, if you're reading something particularly, or if you're doing something like a game, I think the games are probably the worst of all, because there really isn't much logic or rationality or consciousness involvement with the games, or probably to a certain degree even with what you're watching on YouTube. But let me consider here. This also appears, however, a gradual deterioration of the brain, in which case a process of brain degradation occurs, as well as an increasing body weight and an uncontrolled aggressiveness and a gradual loss of intellect. And I tell you, I remember when I used to play video games online that I would become more aggressive after. It was strange. Do you have any comments at all, Nate?
Yeah, so video games offer a false sense of accomplishment for most people. They become extremely aggressive. People, I've experienced this myself, as you have. I also have a lot of friends that are still into video games and stuff, but they would just go in these uncontrolled rants and these anger tirades that I've never seen, because I didn't understand it, Mike, at the time. That I had this one really religious roommate and stuff, and he got into a game called EverQuest. And he would basically sneak out of his room, grab some food, and then sneak back in there and continue playing for these long marathons.
Wow.
And it's just, it goes, one of the underlying themes that happens, even in, like, it seems all industries and stuff, like, people will never, well, I'm going to be kind of all over the place here, but hopefully I get to a point where it makes some sort of sense. So, like, with video games and stuff, people, when they go ahead and they start thinking in terms of these things, they think in terms of giving away their harmony and their peace and stuff. And one of the pushes from the media has been, let's make things simpler for human beings. Let's just make things really simpler. And I remember when I was younger, them talking about newspapers, and the newspapers, they said the newspapers are written at a third grade level.
Really?
Right. And I thought that was interesting. So basically there's been a conscious effort by the engineers, but not so much by the engineers, but by, corporations and stuff, to push a more easy, simple to use device on people. Think of how many steps are being taken out of the old way of doing things. The old way of filing. We had to really put a lot of physical effort into filing, for example. Now we don't have to do that much when it comes to that. We just type in a name, it finds the location, and we can insert a new record into a database, and we're good. There's a lot of joy that comes with accomplishment that people will never know, because there's a struggle there, and when you overcome something, this is how a human being actually is supposed to develop naturally. They're not supposed to have everything so easily. In fact, it was mentioned in some of the contact reports that Safaf, I guess when Fatah was talking about his dad, he said, my dad told me some things, but he didn't tell me everything. He left these huge gaping holes in the information, but I would have to achieve those myself.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Very good points, Nate. Let me continue here. Likewise, all of these negative phenomena forms also apply to all other electronic media of any kind, When the necessary consciousness work is transferred to this and there is no more determining self-controlling, logical, intellectual, and rational consciousness activity. If it is consumed only through digital media, and thus through the consciousness-based work is neglected, then it leads to evil consequences, through which is occurring a general deterioration of the ratio. Do you remember the term ratio? The term ratio is that part of our brain that actually makes us human. And it's talked about in the book, The Psyche. And I didn't look it up again before the show. I might be able to find it quickly in my notes if I'm lucky. But the ratio is the part of the material mentality that actually makes us human. And somehow using electronic media, there it is, page 28 of Psyche, ratio. The human being has something in his spirit consciousness and material consciousness that fundamentally makes him a human being. And that's the ratio. And using this electronic media actually seems to attack that. It also attacks the memory. The psyche in the body also arises, and this, I've seen this happen to me too, also arises a lack of ideas, a lack of motivation, and a lack of interest with regards to a general physical fitness. It seems to, you just don't want to go out and get exercise. It does something to you. And knowledge-based interests, as well as regarding a good and upright mode of life. And later down here, it even talks about step by step, the life capability, the life endurance capability, the self-value, the personal choice capability, the thought and feeling world, as well as the power of self-initiative wither through the whole thing. So, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit offline, Nate, but this has been one of the most eye-opening things that has really just grabbed a hold of me and really made me think. And I'm trying very hard to kind of minimize my activity as much as possible. Any comments?
A lack of ideas.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you would tell yourself to demotivate yourself? I remember what I used to tell myself. And what I used to tell myself is, like, I'd go on these like 6 to 8 hour runs on the game called Counter-Strike, and I would say to myself, I go, I got to do something, and then the little thought would come into me and go, well, what else are you going to do? Like there was nothing else in the world but this. I'd be like, oh, you know what, thought, you're right. Let me go back to it.
So somehow we lose our free will. It's an addiction. Then it becomes an addiction, like any other addiction, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, that's basically an introduction to that topic, and it's only about a 3-page contact, so I recommend people print that out and read it. And
that was contact 543.
Yes.
Right.
Contact 543. Go ahead.
For those people in the or that may listen to this on the archive, I'd like to read a small thing that I got off of the forum. And it says, and if you find yourself stuck in this type of addiction, just remember this, everything starts small. Everything that comes into existence begins very small, regardless of what it is. Let it be the universal consciousness creation, a human being, an animal, a plant, an idea, or a work. What the human being thinks of as an idea starts very small and fragile, but exactly like a grain swells by the constant humidification and nourishment, germinates, roots, and grows and unfolds to an ear of corn. In a similar way, a thought, an idea, or a work strengthens and comes to realization. What you think, you become. An idea in the center of attention will come to realization sooner or later, depending on the intensity and logicality of your thoughts and feelings.
And that was on one of the forums?
Yeah. This was from the book Arahat Atrasada.
Is that translated into English yet? Do you know?
No, I don't think so. It's just some excerpts are.
I'd love to. There's a whole bunch of books I'd like to get, but I probably will never actually completely learn everything in the Might of Thoughts anyway, so I guess maybe I don't really need that many other books.
Well, I was thinking about that too, because, I did the 77 meditation thing, and I think once you incorporate this at a very specific level, once you get it, it's kind of almost like second nature, and you're running on autopilot with a lot of these, affirmations and these ideas. And so just by your nature of being, you've already incorporated this. Once you go through that struggle, not that you can't continually grow and stuff like that, but like with the 77 meditations, basically you repeat this meditation until you feel the effect take hold in your mind. And
do you have any of that handy? Could you read a few for us?
Well, maybe from memory. The more tranquil and tenacious I become, the more difficulties I overcome. There's one I use a lot. In all situations, I always remain relaxed and thereby gain might over myself.
I remember that one.
Here's another one. I don't have it right in front of me, but maybe I'll pull it up right now. So yeah, this is now, okay, here we go. So I guess there's a good one on the FIGU Canada site. It talks about some of them. It is a joy to me to know and to value myself. I like that one too. And you look at these things, they're not like wishy-washy, I don't know, of like almost self-delusional hypnosis stuff, where someone might look into a mirror and repeat a mantra, when it is they're just deluding themselves. But these things always kind of come back to a very neutral, self-affirming position. Let me find the one I really like. Hopefully.
Well, before you do, I think it was the second one that you recalled from your memory that talked about the more tranquil and tenacious I become, something to that effect.
The more tranquil and tenacious I become, the more difficulties I overcome.
Well, that's an interesting concept, because usually we don't put together the idea of being tranquil and tenacious at the same time.
Definitely not. I mean, that's where our power lies.
And that's so interesting. That's so interesting that you can be tenacious and still be tranquil. What a wonderful idea. Yeah. That hadn't even occurred to me before, that you could do that. But that seems to make sense. I like that one a lot. Did you have another one there handy?
Oh, I have them all now.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Let me see here if I can find it. I would say that I'll try to recall this from memory since I don't have it right offhand. But it goes something like this: in all things, I raise myself up to a higher viewpoint, so I look down upon myself and thereby instantly recognize my errors and able to correct them.
That's very visual.
And I think that's very, very helpful in, strengthening ourselves, realizing that we're going to have errors and faults, and to take an honest look at ourselves, because it's very, I don't know, it's very hard, to tell people that they're doing something wrong, especially if they're not receptive to it. But then you teach them something like this, and I think it gets them into the idea that they're not that they're actually infallible or not infallible, are capable of making mistakes, and therefore correcting them. I think one of the points. Go ahead.
And getting back to the whole idea of the electronic media thing, is I think what happens with the electronic media is that we don't have to use our mind. We don't have to be creative. We don't have to take responsibility. We just kind of zone out and just give ourselves over to the electronic media. Which is... Go ahead.
All right. I'm just going to go into the whole, the people and their ways of telling, I think I kind of mentioned this yesterday, but the ways of telling you to shut up when you talk about this type of stuff is always very interesting. And I keep on reading, like when I read through The Might of the Thoughts or The Psyche or even The Way to Live, there is mentioning of how what actually is happening in the minds of other people. They're coming from a very scared and pessimistic know-it-all point of view that doesn't engender real hope or real aspirations. But some of the fun ones that I've come across was, when I start talking about something that might be, for example, I think it was of the terrorist attacks. It's in the context, one of the recent translations of the terrorist attacks. I think it said 175 terror attacks since September 2001, 9/11. Only 6 of those terrorist attacks were legitimate. All the other ones had the CIA and FBI hands all over it. So if we go back to things like the Boston City bombers.
Oh, yeah, that was so phony. I thought it was, man. Maybe I'm wrong, but that looked totally ridiculous. The one guy there supposedly just got his leg blown off, and he's sitting there in his wheelchair, and they're wheeling him along. There's no blood. He's totally conscious. He's not writhing in agony. It's just so bizarre. What's going on here? Anyway, I'm ranting.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I would only say to this, I don't think that obviously there were bombs that did go off and stuff, but that's not what I mean by, what happened is they went on this manhunt, but what didn't get enough attention was the fact that either the same day or the next day after, an FBI agent confronted one of the bomber's cousins here and murdered him at 12 o'clock at night.
Wow.
So you have to take all these things. And another thing is, you mentioned the word, in this day and age, people are becoming obtuse and indolent. But obtuse is really, really slow to get your head around things. And I think one of the things is people don't look at things as a holism. They oftentimes see things and try to nitpick. And they don't want to look at all the evidence or all the other circumstances. So oftentimes when I'll say something at this end of the spectrum, the way people tell me to shut up is, people on the internet can put anything they want, right?
Right.
You can find all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet, and that's true. So you have to be.
But they never say, "Oh, boy, you find all kinds of crazy stuff on the television." You don't hear that. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely not. And that goes to like the other times. Like I'll be talking about something about the spirit teachings in a roundabout way. I never try to speak. I don't speak to them directly because I think people will be turned off by it. But like practical experience, and what you have to do and how you have to do it. And, and sometimes I'll get complimented, but that was their way of telling me to shut up. Wow, you got a lot of information and knowledge there. Like, you really know a lot. And then you try to continue speaking, because I'm not even thinking of it as a shut up, and then they, kind of turn and walk away or something. It's just like, wow, that was interesting.
That's the first time I'd heard that. Oh, man. anyway, here's a passage that is in the Might of Thoughts on page 38, and it's something that flies in the face of religion a little bit. And people may find this a little offensive, but try not to react to this. Just kind of listen to what it says. And my first 3 times through this book, I read it, and I probably, through my own religious bias, screened it out a little bit. But I think it's starting to make a whole lot more sense to me now. It says, wishes and prayers are never petitions to a god or a saint. Rather, they are thoughts generated by oneself, which are fed back out of the consciousness and inner self to one's own consciousness and inner self, to thereby create a fulfillment. So these thoughts go out from the inner consciousness, from the inner self and the consciousness, and they are fed back in to the consciousness in the inner self, where they can reach a fulfillment. Now, this is quite the opposite of directing wishes and prayers to a divinity or a saint. In this form, the human being namely is and remains a prisoner of his or her thoughts and of himself and herself, and cannot hope for realization. So, Nate, I'm getting a lot of noise, man. What are you doing back there?
Did you hear typing? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I'm hearing typing. I'm hearing all kinds of movement. Could be just the phone. But anyway, so prayer, because in terms of religion, we're always thinking of generating. It's something that we're generating out from ourselves. But the Meyer information says it's something that comes from our inner self and our consciousness back to our consciousness and to our inner self, where we, through the might of our own thoughts, apply the right thinking to it so that we can make those petitions a reality. And you probably are very familiar with this particular passage, correct, Nate?
Sort of.
I thought I had heard you talk about this before.
But like prayer, all prayer is self prayer. You're praying to yourself, it goes out, and it's just interesting because I don't know. I'm open to the obviously I'm not open to necessarily prayer. Obviously, I want to go to the point we see effects, and then actually getting to those people that have had either objective or subjective experiences that have resulted from their prayer, and they know it. They know something has happened there. But then they automatically assume the cause was because of some deity or, not realizing that it was themselves,
It was the power of their own thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And you try to tell someone that, and they're just like, what? No.
Now, here's another little bit of something from the Might of Thoughts book that I think is kind of a wake-up, and it talks about unconscious thoughts and the reason that so many times we shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak. Unfortunately, the rule is that the human being does not think consciously, but largely unconsciously. Consequently, the human being is almost always the unconscious cause of those circumstances in which he lives. And furthermore, is the fact that while the human being wants the good and the positive, she constantly prevents exactly the achievement of the good and the positive, because through wrongly steered thoughts, the human being maintains wishes, hopes, and yearnings in which no wise agree with the good and the positive. So a lot of times we don't realize it, but we're maintaining, if you've got a bad circumstance in your life that you're trying to fix, sometimes it's because your own unconscious thoughts are keeping that circumstance alive. Comments, Nate?
That is a mind job for many people. especially when it comes to things like hauntings or poltergeist or other type of mysterious stuff going on, that they'll never guess that it's their mind doing these things to themselves and actually manipulating matter in the physical. They think it's a demon or something else.
Here's another.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Finish your thought. Finish your thought, man.
No, man. I was just actually going to go on to, and that's. I mean, this information, when it comes down to it, it really has to do with growth, and as was said in like Contact Report 10, was basically I think it says the true darkness is ignorance, and only can be overcome by the light of wisdom. Which is, for me, it's really a profound statement, because when someone believes, they're actively engaging in ignorance.
Whoa, that is profound. Well, I also love later on in Contact Report 10 where she says that love and wisdom go together, and that the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. And to me, that's so profound. Go ahead.
Have you heard of the 12 leaders?
Go ahead, tell us about that.
So the 12 leaders is in these are the things should guide human beings' lives, and they're 12 virtues, I think, if you will. Even though one of the leaders is virtues, so that's great. So I'll just read them out. So it's not 12 leaders like different people or magical creatures. It's just things to try to balance yourself with. So 1 is true love, 2 is esteem, 3 is deference, 4 is kindness. 4 is kind-heartedness, 5 is dignity, 6 is virtues, 7 is faithfulness, 8 is equitableness, 9 is righteousness, 10 is uprightness, 11 is modesty, and 12 is obligation.
Well, it's interesting what the Meyer information says about true love, or about love in general, and I've always loved I always go back to Billy's passages where he was a very young boy, and he was back in Boulac, Switzerland, and he crawled out the lower window in his bedroom, and he sits on the bench that his father had made, and he looked up at a beautiful starry sky, and he said, "My life exists because of the love of creation." And he also said the most profound things like, the infinite love of creation connects all life, because in all life, that love lies hidden. And he talked about being able to see the light of the stars, but that there was an invisible light, which he called the love of creation. So here's a 4-year-old boy understanding these most profound bits of information. Have you ever read that, Nate?
Yeah, definitely. When I first got into the information, I came across that. What they kind of got me thinking about when you were reading that was, the material also talks about that the teachings, of the Spirit are going to be turned into a religion, and they can only do that through the use of ignorance and fragmenting, which I had mentioned earlier, fragmenting the information, not looking at it as a whole, but cherry picking through it. And I also, that reminded me of, I don't know why, but it reminded me of the 12th leader obligation or responsibility. And I would like to read something from The Way to Live that I found very interesting. So this is what would we call that? Section 263 on page 196. If the human being possesses knowledge, courage, and selflessness, manifold talents, decency, honesty, and indifference, as well as respect for all things, if he or she is well versed in the muses, in the truth, and the creational natural laws and recommendations, if he or she has reservations about the benefit of honesty and laughs only when he or she has reason for honest joy, if he or she still holds to a given promise, unforgotten even after decades, if he or she lives only according to the truth and in positive equalizedness, furthers all good characteristics, if he or she helps the human being next to him or her to live the life, and if he or she respects and follows the evolutive mode of life, and he or she is modest and without conceit, then he or she can be named a true human being. Now, what really struck me about this whole passage that I've fallen in love with is if he or she still holds to a given promise, unforgotten even after decades. Because I think there's a few things that I've promised people and that I haven't, I try to hold to those promises,
right.
And I try to, and so the few things are outlining with me, maybe even some unforgotten ones. But I just remember the insincerity of people oftentimes would say, "Oh yeah, let's do lunch," or I'll call you, right?
Right.
And they never call and stuff.
Well, it's interesting that the Meyer information says there's a false love and that there's a true love, and that the false love, the affective love, is always kind of dependent on a person's social standing, their money, their looks, the current rapport at the time, but that the wisdom-conditioned love is always dependable and it's always stable. Now, I have an interesting passage here, too, in The Might of Thoughts that talks a little bit related to happiness. It says, "The circumstances of life are very often extremely complicated, and the thinking, as a rule, is extraordinarily deep-rooted, just as are the requirements for happiness, which the human being creates in himself or herself. This refers to inner happiness, from which an equalized psychical state results, a happiness which guarantees calmness, love, peace, harmony, and freedom, and which is not dependent on external circumstances, rather solely on the inner state, on an inner state of equalizedness and harmony." So really, as hard as it is for us to focus on, that the real inner happiness comes from our own thinking, not from the circumstances of life. There's another passage in there that says it's our own disharmony in our psyche that causes our suffering to grow. And so that's one of the things that I've remembered over the studies. And it's always good to remember that good thinking leads to good feelings, and that the feeling, there is the word Gefühl in the German, and feelings that come from the thoughts. And then the good feelings then can roll into good habits, and the good habits then lead to good circumstances. So you are in control of the circumstances of your life. And you're not dependent on circumstances. You're really in control of those circumstances on your life, but you have to start with your own thoughts and seeing that they remain in that harmonious balance, neither good nor evil. Any comments, Nate?
So this one of the parts of that you had mentioned there is effective love versus effective love, or a false idea of love. And as a human being, I think it there's two things. I'm always constantly trying to work on the effective love. Like, if I find myself in a state of resistance towards another human being, I try to recognize them as a human being that has gone through a lot, or is taking in the world in a certain way and stuff. And I try to approach it that way. But on a relationship level, it's very hard to try to communicate an effective love towards your partner, so that they would understand that that's how, for example, my wife used to ask me, or my ex-wife used to ask me, do you love me, or something like that. I go, and I would always say yes, but it's not what you think. So maybe that's not a good thing to say.
That could be something which could be expanded into, on her side, I think could be negatively reacted to, even though there was probably no negativeness in it.
Right, because I would say, look at my actions towards you. Is it not based in, love and consideration, or but it wasn't enough in certain people. But that is something you have to kind of differentiate. Like, so when we're looking at somebody or another, what are we basing our, how the Play-Arn go through a 3-year trial in order to get married? Like, what would we be basing our connectedness to another on?
Well, one of the most mysterious things in the world is compatibility. And what makes two people compatible over time? Sometimes if they're madly in love, that's going to really get in the way of compatibility. There's kind of a real relaxation about compatibility, and that's why relationships where there is that relaxation and that peace are the ones that usually last. And I think that's why we have like a 70% divorce rate in the U.S. right now, is because of the lack of relaxation and peace and the lack of compatibility. People are always looking for the next big thing, the next big thrill, and really it's the day-to-day calm and that you should be looking for. And that day-to-day calm is what leads to the next day and the next week and the month and the year, and then the relationship lasting over a long, long time. But I think we're kind of brainwashed by the media to look for highs, the big high, the big magic moment under the stars or whatever. But we should really be looking for that day-to-day connectedness and compatibility. Any thoughts, Nate?
Have you ever had one of those, what you thought was a magic moment? And if so,
yeah.
what did you feel like at that moment?
Well, you can feel a whole lot of things, all of which are generally temporary. It's like an extreme moment of stimulation, and it's really not what the long-lasting compatible relationship is about. But what exactly is the magic of compatibility? I think, there needs to be a lot of study and work done there. And don't the Play-Arn, they have this whole thing in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, when they want to get married, like I suppose they decided, okay, this person's right for me, I'm right for them. Then they go to a spirit leader or someone who's wise, and that's all that means. And the spirit leader says yay or nay. Now the spirit leader advises, but does not enforce them at any way, shape, or form. I suppose. Because this is how I keep on understanding that all change and self-change. And so therefore all direction is self-direction. They want to focus on the spirit inside of each person, aligning itself with creation. So therefore, if that consciousness that rests on that spirit makes a mistake, it can change. It's not a compulsory, in other words. And that might be really far for people to understand. But so they go to the spirit leader or this wise person, and basically they go through an interview process. And then as it continues on, they're to see each other once a week, strictly no sex or other things like that. Getting involved with this person for the next 2 years, and then on the third year they don't see each other at all. And then when they come back after 3 years, they go through an exit interview process to see if they still want to, or this person is still the right person for them. Therefore, This ensures that lust, that the attraction that comes with lust, is completely gone as best as within reason, and it would ensure a lifelong partnership.
So all the big temporary strong feelings and physical urges and all that, even that wild rapport would kind of all calm down. And then that would be interesting. After a year, did you say a year before they come back?
Yeah, you haven't talked to me for a year. Well, I couldn't imagine the argument there.
That would be a weird situation, because after you've had all these strong feelings and interchange, then you have to kind of come back and deal with this person on just a pure face value. Do you want to go forward with this? I bet that, that really brings you back to reality in a big way.
Yeah, and it would be, we wouldn't have the 70%. I still think we would still have a lot, but, nowhere near 70%. Maybe 20% of relationships would fail.
Mm-hmm.
But this would probably be because of overpopulation and just inability to be around that other person and being influenced from the outside a lot more because of overpopulation.
Well, I think overpopulation would be a fantastic topic for another show. I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon, Nate, and I want to thank everyone that listened in during the live show and all the people that are going to listen to the archive. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics, and I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great day.